All right. Welcome back, everyone. We're jumping right back into this creation story.
Yeah. Day two this time.
Day two. Day two of the creation story. And things are getting,
A little more interesting.
they're getting interesting. We talked about, day one kind of setting the scene, right? We have
Light and dark.
light and dark. But day two, uh, we come to this idea of the firmament. And
Which is always a fun one.
always a fun word, always a fun concept.
Yeah, it's not something we talk about every day, is it?
No, not really.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think, oh, day two, okay, that's the sky, right?
Yeah.
Like, let there be sky. But it's so much more than that.
It really is.
So what do you think? What do we need to know about this idea of the firmament?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that this is an ancient text.
Okay,
And so we can't really understand it without understanding how the ancients viewed the world.
right.
Like their cosmology, their understanding of the universe was very different from ours. So when they heard firmament, they weren't picturing just, empty space.
Mhm.
They were picturing something much more solid, much more tangible.
Right, so Genesis 1.6, we see God creating this expanse, which is often translated as firmament.
Yeah, and the Hebrew word there, it literally means like a hammered out sheet.
Oh,
So you can
wow.
almost imagine them picturing like a metal dome
Whoa.
or some kind of solid structure.
So, like, are we talking like snow globe kind of thing
Yeah,
here?
yeah, that's a really good analogy, like a dome over the earth. And
Wow.
we actually see this idea in a lot of ancient cultures, not just in the Bible.
Really?
Oh yeah, it was a very common way of understanding the universe back then.
Interesting.
So like in Mesopotamia, for example, they believed that the sky was a solid vault
Wow.
that was held up by pillars,
Interesting.
and that the stars were actually like little holes in this vault that let the light of heaven shine through.
Wow, so this wasn't like a unique idea that just the ancient Hebrews had.
Right, right. It tells us something really important about how people back then viewed the world.
Right, that it was like this enclosed space, this structured space.
Right, and that there was this like very clear division between the heavens and the earth.
Right, and that kind of gets to this idea of separation, right?
Absolutely.
Which I think is one of the big themes of day two. God's not just creating stuff, he's organizing it.
Right, he's creating order. And if you think about it, that's kind of the foundation for everything else. Because without order, you just have chaos.
Right,
You can't have life, you can't have diversity.
right. So this separation is essential.
Totally essential. It's what makes creation possible.
So Genesis 1.7, God's not done separating.
Mm.
He separates the waters below
Seas, yeah.
seas from the dry land.
Right, and it's this separation that allows for, the different kinds of life that will come later.
Right, so it's not just about like drawing a line in the sand. It's about setting the stage for everything else.
Exactly. And then, of course, we come to the naming of the firmament,
Yeah, Genesis 1.8, God calls it heaven.
which I think is so interesting because it's not just a name for the sky, is it?
No, it's more than that. There's definitely like a spiritual element there, right?
Right. It's also God's dwelling place. So it's this realm that's, beyond our understanding.
Right. And this is where we start to see this idea of a separation between the divine and the earthly.
Absolutely. And that separation is key to understanding a lot of the rest of the Bible, really.
Yeah, yeah. Makes you think about, like, if they thought there was this literal dome,
Yeah.
how do they explain things like rain, you know, or the stars moving?
Well, they had their own explanations. They believed there were like windows or gates in the firmament
Right.
that God could open and close to let the rain through or to let the stars shine through.
Fine.
And I think that's really interesting because it shows how they were trying to reconcile their understanding of the universe
All right.
with what they actually observed.
Yeah.
They didn't have the scientific knowledge that we have today,
Right.
but they were still trying to make sense of the world.
It's fascinating to think how much our understanding of the universe has changed,
Absolutely.
We've gone from this idea of like a solid enclosed world to a universe that's just like mind-bogglingly vast.
Right, with billions of galaxies and
It's so hard to
black holes and all sorts of crazy stuff.
But here's the thing that I think is really interesting. Even though we know the firmament isn't a literal dome anymore,
Yeah,
it's still a powerful symbol.
totally. That idea of a barrier or a protector, it still resonates with us, doesn't it?
Right. We still talk about heaven like as this place that's separate from the earth.
Yeah. And I think that separation is really important, even if it's not a physical separation.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual separation. It's a way of acknowledging that there's something more to reality than what we can see and touch.
Right. So if the firmament, if it's this like separation between the divine and the earthly,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
What are the firmaments in our own lives?
Yeah.
You know, like
Mhm.
what barriers do we put up?
That's a really good question. And I think it's a very personal question, too,
Yeah.
because everyone has their own firmaments. But I think some common ones are things like, fear.
Uh-huh.
Fear can be a big barrier. It can keep us from pursuing our dreams,
Right.
from taking risks.
Right. Or even just like connecting with people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then there's, pride. Pride can be a firmament, too. It can keep us from admitting when we're wrong
Right.
or from asking for help.
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking about the firmament, it's not just about like some ancient idea about the sky.
Right.
It's really about like examining our own lives
Yeah.
and figuring out what those barriers are.
Absolutely. And then once we've identified those barriers, we can start to break them down.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive into day 2 and the firmament,
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember it's not just about the physical world.
Yeah.
It's about this idea of order and purpose.
Right.
And it's about our relationship, as humanity to the divine.
And even though our understanding of the universe has changed,
Yeah.
I think the symbolism of the firmament is still just as relevant today.
Totally, totally. So what are your firmaments? Think about those. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll be back with more soon.
See you at the guest time.